Hello there. Welcome everyone. Today is April 15th. This is Jeff Lewis, and welcome to Temperature Check with Jeff. By now you know the drill. Pull out your home thermometer, do whatever you got to do with it. I don't care where you stick it. I actually don't want to know. Maybe I'll just be pointing it somewhere, but just do as I do and let's get some temperatures going. Okay, there we go. 97.5. Excellent. So today we are doing an Ask Me Anything episode of Temperature Check with Jeff. I posed 11 questions in a prior temperature check. I'm going to answer those still over many temperature checks to come. But today I just wanted to poll folks on Twitter, get some questions, see what people are curious about. I got actually something like 35 questions, and I don't want to be here for like 30 minutes answering 30. It'll take a long time to answer 35 questions, so I've selected, a handful, and I'll answer the rest in future temperature checks. We'll sort of stagger it over the next few episodes. So let's kick it off with a question from Julie Frederickson. Julie asks, have you reconsidered the must meet people in person to do business thing yet? So I've been very vocal that to make an investment in a company, I have to have met the team in person. And the answer to that question is no. I am not reconsidering the must meet people in person rule. That said, I am willing to meet people in person and actually have a meeting with an entrepreneur on the calendar for actually within the next 5 business days. I will be wearing one of my self-sterilized and reused N95 masks. I might wear gloves. I will also be wearing eyewear, but I need to meet people in person to make an investment. Cannot make an investment unless we've met in person. That's a rule that I'm sticking to, but I'm willing to meet people in person despite the viral pandemic. Okay, next, Omer asks, who do you completely disagree with on most things, but still deeply respect? There's a lot of folks I really disagree with and respect. The person that came to mind immediately, so I'll just answer with my immediate reaction, was actually Candace Owens. For those of you who aren't familiar with Candace Owens, you can follow her on Twitter at RealCandaceO. She's someone who, on I'd say 95% of things, I quite strongly disagree with her. Probably agree with her on a number of things as well, but mostly disagree with her. But she is literally, for those of you who aren't aware of who she is, she's basically like a political pundit, sort of public personality, provocateur type person. Definitely somebody you consider to be sort of on the right politically. Very strong supporter of real Donald Trump. Also, that's his Twitter handle. So I think she basically lives very much on Twitter, just as one could argue Trump also lives very much on Twitter. And there is something about Twitter in that, I used to say metaphorically that Twitter was today's public square. And that was sort of pre-COVID-19. And now post-COVID-19, it's not metaphorically the public square. It actually, full stop, just is the public square. And I haven't seen anyone as good at Twitter, as good at being provocative, engaging folks, building their own personality, and just being sort of true to them, their unique selves on Twitter. No one is as good at that I've found as Candace Owens. So I have a lot of respect for her for that. Disagree with a lot of her points, but she's worth a follow. Even if you are completely on the other end of the spectrum politically, definitely someone who's worth tracking. She's the best at Twitter I've ever seen. Okay, Abe, and I'm sorry if I pronounced your name, but Abe asks, what is the craziest conspiracy theory you believe in? Well, this is a very dangerous question. Let me just do a disclaimer up front that I tend to believe in actually a lot of different conspiracy theories. And so certainly as someone who's been, I talked in an earlier episode how I've been scapegoated, wrongly blamed for things that I've not been responsible for. I've also been actually the victim of conspiracies. And so I actually think conspiracies happen more often than most people think. One that I'll talk about in answer to this question, great question, by the way, is actually related to Theranos. And so, one thing with conspiracy theories is that it's possible for someone to be a bad actor, to do something wrong, whether it's fraud or to do something else that's sort of wrong and incorrect. It's possible to do something wrong and for there to also concurrently be a conspiracy against that person. So it's not the fact that you have done something really bad, or that one has done something really bad, does not preclude the possibility that there is also a conspiracy against that individual or that organization. And in the case of Theranos, I don't want to get into too much detail, but from very credible source, was told about a very detailed conspiracy against Theranos, orchestrated by the two largest lab companies in the U.S., the two incumbents, Quest and LabCorp. The conspiracy, really rang true to me. It seemed very plausible that actually Quest and LabCorp were out to get Elizabeth Holmes and were out to get Theranos. Not saying that Elizabeth Holmes did not do very bad things, but I think it's also plausible that Quest and LabCorp had a conspiracy against the company and against Elizabeth, because if they had been successful, they would have really disrupted the duopoly that Quest and LabCorp have on lab testing in the United States. And we're really seeing the power of that duopoly now with COVID-19 testing. The vast majority of COVID-19 tests, I believe, I'm not sure if this is accurate, but I believe as of today, are being run through Quest and LabCorp. It's taking a long time, actually, unless you're in critical condition in a hospital, to get your results. And it's really, pardon my French, a clusterfuck. And I don't know about you, but I sure as heck would love to have a finger prick, very quick turnaround time results mechanism. Although in the case of COVID-19 tests, you need a swab, not a blood test. But in any case, it would have been great if Theranos had worked. I believe there was likely a conspiracy against Elizabeth Holmes. Also think she did some bad stuff, but there was also a conspiracy. Okay. Sammy asks, other than narrative violations, what are some non-obvious factors you take into account when making investment decisions? So I'd say one would be psychology. In particular, we at Bedrock think a lot about what is the psychological profile of the founder or co-founders of the company, what drives them, like what are their we like to build out like a psychological profile of them. We kind of are armchair psychologists, and we think that's an important part of being an investor, particularly when you're investing oftentimes before there's data and metrics. But beyond just the psychology of the founders, we want to build out a psychological profile of the target end user, the market psychology, the team at the company writ large, like what would motivate someone to work at this specific business, psychologically, what type of people would this company attract. So psychology is something we think a lot about. And then secondarily, we always ask ourselves, why do we have an edge on this opportunity? So whether the edge is in winning the deal, whether the edge is in understanding something profound about the business that we think other investors, other venture capitalists who we compete against would miss, we really need to have high belief in ourselves that we actually have some sort of unique edge. And so whenever a founder is running like a sort of auction process and is very transparent about that, I was like, yeah, we're talking to like 8 different firms, everyone's on the same timetable, we're doing all of the pitches, in this week, and then we're expecting term sheets the next week. We just run away whenever that happens. Like, we don't engage in processes like that because it's basically definitionally entrepreneurs telling us we're just going to decide based on price. It's like a price auction. So those are the types of processes that maybe are great for some firms, but I don't like to do that. And honestly, I think that really very few investors explicitly ask about psychology and edge when considering any new investment. And I think that those two questions, coupled with the narrative violations filter that we use at Bedrock, really leads to us investing in a dramatically different set of companies, a different end portfolio in any given fund than sort of most other firms would end up with. Okay. Fernando asked an interesting question. Is COVID a plus or a minus from a Girardian perspective? And then he suggests that perhaps a plus would be less globalization and mimesis, and a minus would be less growth leads to more competition and scapegoating, ? So for those who aren't familiar, I'm not going to do like a full tutorial on the teachings of René Girard, but I am not I would not consider myself to be a Girardian. I do think that René Girard has very interesting theories. I find his work, quite honestly, really hard to read, so I sort of more of a Cliff's Notes student of René Girard. I think 90% of the stuff you can get from Girard, you can also get from Shakespeare. I'm much more into Shakespeare than I am Girard. That said, I would say COVID is actually hyper negative. It is very negative from a Girardian perspective, because basically everything is just going to become much more zero sum. I think the net result, and I can talk in a future temperature check about why, will be just much more income inequality. There'll be just a much bigger gap between sort of the top 1% and everyone else as a result of this virus. I think that'll play out over many years, but it just results in a more zero sum world, which will result in much more scapegoating. It's also, I think, disrupted a lot of the societal sort of glue that holds society together. So I think there's going to be a real erosion, a real corrosion in our communities societally, which is going to lead to just a lot more anger, a lot more scapegoating, and a lot more suffering. And so I think it's highly negative from a Girardian perspective. I certainly think that the way in which communities and governments and institutions are responding in a very non-coordinated fashion, and it's quite dangerous from a Girardian perspective. And then on top of that, the fact that we are all socially isolated from one another and actually can't come together. I think there's all of this room for crazy Girardian stuff to play out online, and quite frankly, I think there's potential for social unrest in the U.S. and other countries, and we might actually in a world where there's a lot of social unrest, very likely we'll end up scapegoating some of the wrong folks. By definition, scapegoating is unfair, and we'll probably end up blaming some of the wrong folks, thus scapegoating them. Zishan, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. If I didn't, let me know. Asks a number of questions. I'm going to answer one now, and we can get to your others on a subsequent episode. Will VC see the same returns? Will venture capital see the same returns next decade, betting on software, or is a shift to atoms needed? Well, I would actually argue that it's possible that the paper returns that VC has seen over the past decade betting on software, a lot of those returns might vaporize. So I'd actually argue that maybe the returns that VC thought that they had, that we as VCs, as an industry, thought we had over the past decade, maybe those returns are actually going to be a lot worse than we thought. We'll see how things play out, but certainly there's a possibility that a lot of things are going to go to zero. A lot of highly valued companies are going to go to zero. And the IP, someone's asked about the IPO window right now in the comments. The IPO window might actually be shut for a number of years. We'll see. So certainly liquidity is going to get pushed out. So even the current wave of private software companies, really unclear what the actual liquid end returns of those companies are going to be. Cautiously optimistic on my portfolio, on our portfolio, but quite frankly, who knows? Could be really bad. And I actually think there's going to be a whole new wave of new software opportunities coming out of this. And the returns from those could actually be way better. And I actually think there is going to be a whole new wave of atoms-focused companies to address new consumer needs. For example, like my partner Eric and I, my business partner Eric and I, we want like a household unit that you can put that Amazon packages and grocery deliveries go through, where they're decontaminated of any potential virus, and then put in. I know that's a very like obnoxious product request, but I'd be willing to pay like $20,000 something for that. I think there's like a million examples of things like that where there's going to be new innovations in the world of atoms, given the way we live is going to change somewhat post-COVID, I believe. Kelly asks, what advice do you have for Lambda School students who want to eventually launch their own startup? For those who don't know, we at Bedrock are investors in Lambda School, and my advice would be you should pitch us on your startup. So if you are a Lambda School student, definitely we at Bedrock would love to hear about your startup, would love to learn about it. I'd advise one of the great things about starting a startup is you get to pick whoever you want to work with. So I'd advise like really spending time getting to know your team, your potential co-founders. Maybe you're going to meet them through Lambda. Maybe they're people you already know who bring different skills to the table. But A, spend a lot of time getting to know the initial 1 to 2 people you're going to work with, and B, reach out to me via Twitter or email. We're definitely up for learning about your business here at Bedrock if you are a Lambda School grad. Marissa asks, and her actual Twitter handle is also Marissa. I quite enjoyed following her, just discovered her a few days ago. She asks, can we look forward to more Shakespeare and temperature checks. Is Henry IV, quote, uneasy lies the head that wears a crown, a truth? Great question, Marissa. So one, yes, there is going to be a lot more Shakespeare coming your way over the months to come. B, no, I do not believe that line from Henry IV, uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. I do not believe it is a universal truth. I believe that so basically what this line means is like, you can't really sleep at night. If you're a leader, it's sort of, you're always worrying, effectively, is what Shakespeare's trying to convey through this line. If you actually read Henry IV, I think this line was in part 2. Henry IV is a multi-part play. I think this one's from part 2, if I remember correctly. But in part 2, it really becomes clear that Henry IV is a weak king. He's a weak leader. And I think if you're a weak leader, yeah, you struggle to sleep at night. No, I'm not a lumberjack, clever. If you're a weak leader, you struggle to sleep at night. I think if you're a strong leader, you have the courage of your convictions, you can sleep relatively well at night. Your head is not uneasy for wearing the crown. That said, every leader, myself included, has moments of doubt, phases in their trajectory where they're going to doubt themselves and they're going to be uneasy. But for most great leaders, those are periods of time that they can like get through versus like paralyzed by worry, which was the case with Henry IV, Shakespeare's Henry IV. That's all for today. We'll be back again tomorrow. Again, Jeff Lewis, April 15th. My temperature is pretty normal. What's yours?